Welcome to this post-game edition of Off the Hook Sports. Wow, what a performance by Tennessee on the road. While I heard an awful lot of people pick Tennessee, I didn't hear anyone pick them decisively, perhaps other than Amanda LaFrada. I believe she did. I had about a 9-point win, but when I think decisively, I think what I saw on Saturday, and that was pretty impressive. So, welcome to the program. Hit that like and subscribe button, share as well. He's Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker. And Caleb, wow, it was a Tennessee performance that was very impressive. I do think that LSU is still in a state of flux. That was obvious from the opening kickoff when they fumbled that. Boutte is still just a fraction of the offense that he should be for LSU. So they've got their issues, but Tennessee never allowed the door to open up enough where they could solve those issues. And to me, Caleb, it was an impressive performance by the Vols.
I agree. At the first half, I think it was a lot of what LSU didn't do as opposed to what Tennessee did do. I think Tennessee, you saw the benefits of the bye. I think there were just some Josh Heupel play calls that honestly were some of the best play calls I think I've ever seen from an offensive coordinator. There was a shovel pass on a fourth down. They had to punt on that drive, but I mean that was a brilliant call. And that touchdown pass to Jalen Hyatt on the first in the first half. I mean that was you can't underestimate or overestimate how big of a deal that touchdown pass was. LSU plays a lot of press coverage. Heupel snuck Jalen Hyatt out onto the outside as a wideout and just trusted him to beat everybody. And I think this is where bye weeks really help. And I don't, everybody's going to talk about, look, 40-13. I don't think Tennessee is that margin better than LSU. Right now, I think they're probably better than LSU. I don't think they're that margin. I think they did benefit from having the bye, and you really saw that with Josh Heupel's offensive play call in the first half.
They had that players only meeting, LSU did. Daniel said it was huge being able to control the clock in the second half. Daniel, I agree with that. Tennessee's offensive line was dominant. We're going to go through some of the grades. You have Jawari Small ripped off a 49 and 50-yard run, and Tennessee was able to control the ball in the second half. That's the evolution. So, Daniel, I totally agree with you. So please like, subscribe, and share, especially. We want everybody to be able to jump on board because this is a big win. And in some ways, you could say this is as big of a win as the Florida game. I know you get that monkey off your back, but you're on the road. So this is still a talented team. This is not like going on the road and beating Missouri. This is a talented team, again, in a state of flux, but Tennessee coming off a bye handled it with the maturity that I don't think the Vols necessarily would have handled it last year. Caleb, I was just overall impressed, if not stunned.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago, this is an LSU team that blew out Mississippi State at home, and it's not a bad team. And I agree. I think last year, if I made it comparable to anything, it was last year's win over Kentucky on the road. But I think we all kind of agreed that Tennessee was playing with house money on that game because expectations were so low. Given the fact that they've been raised a little bit to do what they did at LSU in this game, I mean, that's pretty impressive. I don't think anybody can short sell what they did. And I think that, look, I mean, Dan Orlovsky was pushing it really hard during the game. How can you not make Hendon Hooker a Heisman favorite at this point?
Favorite, yes. As of if I were to fill out my ballot today, he would be number one, especially if Bryce Young doesn't play this evening. And we'll see. I mean, I know a lot of people like Caleb Williams, but I would want to dig in it a little further before. Let me take back that declaration. I would say he would have a great opportunity to win it right now. I want to see the rest of the day. But right now, given there is an East Coast bias, whether that's fair or not, that'll benefit him. Bryce Young's injury. I know Caleb Williams is having one heck of a year. We'll see if that continues at Southern California. But there's every argument to be made that Hooker, which Dan Orlovsky said, who, by the way, is the best analyst right now, I believe, going in football, college,
I love Dan Orlovsky. I think
college,
he's amazing.
yeah, college or
Yes.
pro. He's got a long, fantastic career ahead of him. I don't care how bad he was as an NFL quarterback. He is fantastic.
And
And
he had some bad breaks because he got stuck in Detroit when they went 0-16, and then he got stuck in Indy having to back up Peyton Manning, and we all know how bad the Colts were. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm an Orlovsky fan. I always have been, and so you're right. I think he's a great analyst, and I think ESPN doesn't use him enough.
yeah, well, seems like he was on all the time there for a few months. I don't know if they're in the middle of a contract negotiation or what, because it is like they backed off of him a little bit, whereas it's the offseason he was on all the time. No, I think he's a superstar and he loves Tennessee, which his stuff has been insightful. And I thought that of Orlovsky way before October the 8th today. Falls time saying I believe Tennessee's defense has improved since that Florida game. I completely agree. I think they took the off week and they had the explosion off the edge, which we saw against Pitt, but they had a little bit more than that. They had a little bit of meat in the interior. I thought that they were able to control the line of scrimmage, and we'll get into some stats. But yes, Caleb, I think they took this bye week and got significantly better. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you who the next superstar on this team is. It's going to be Joshua Josephs. It may not be this year, but eventually I think that guy has. I use my eye test, which gets me in trouble, but I believe that guy has special ability.
Oh, I agree. I will say before we get to Joshua Josephs, because that's a totally different story.
Sure.
I somewhat disagree with the idea that the defense improved. I think LSU, I think we just look at the fact that they have a mobile quarterback and we start to think, oh, they're similar to Florida. They're not similar to Florida. Jane Daniels does not have the pocket presence and awareness that Anthony Richardson has. We saw that today, by the way. Okay, there were plenty of times Daniels could have eluded certain pressure that Anthony Richardson would have, and it was a problem, and he wasn't able to do it. On top of that, LSU was really banged up on the offensive line. Will Campbell being out was a big deal. I said, I actually made a prediction before the game that Byron Young and Tyler Barron would combine for 3 sacks. Byron Young almost got that on his own, honestly. And he got 2.5 is how they've recorded it because he assisted on 1 sack. I think LSU does not protect the passer well. And I don't think that's a Brian Kelly problem. I'm not even so sure it's a Jaden Daniels problem. I just think that the system and everything that goes into it, it's Brian Kelly's first year, and there are some problems with it. And I think that Tennessee cashed in.
They're exactly where Tennessee has been in the past, and that is in the first year of a rebuilding year. And there are culture issues there. Dan Orlovsky tried to be as nice as he could in referring to Butte, that he seemed disinterested. No, he's not disinterested. He's not somewhat disinterested. He's completely disinterested. And so they have their issues. But I don't want to say that and shortchange what Tennessee did, because Tennessee went on the road coming off. I know they had a bye week, but coming off a huge Florida win, and they were able to look fantastic. I mean, I texted you at one point, what group on my report card that will go through do you not give them an A? And you said linebackers, which I could certainly see that. The secondary, Kamal hadn't had a face mask penalty, so those to me are pretty inexcusable. But you're really, really nitpicking at this point. I saw someone post at halftime that Hendon Hooker was having accuracy issues towards the end of the second quarter. And he did miss a couple of guys. He missed High and threw a ball that was behind Fant that he could have caught. However, the bottom line is he was if those, I mean, no quarterback goes out and throws 100% perfect passes. I mean, if that's where we are with Hendon Hooker, then I would argue his accuracy, because he's more comfortable, has improved dramatically. And I don't care what completion percentage says. That doesn't matter to me. I think his accuracy has improved over last year.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that before that drive, he got waxed on a sack. The strip sack that, and you can blame him for not seeing the defensive back blitz coming, but I think he got hurt on that play. He got a little rocked, and that messed up his accuracy on that final drive of the first half, second quarter.
Probably
And
did. If there was maybe one knock on either the offensive line or the coaching side of it, you would say that guy's got to be accounted for in some shape, form, or fashion. That there's just no way a guy should come that free, Caleb, for a guy that's that important for Tennessee. So that can't happen. But I don't think that's going to be a major concern. That schematically you're going to get beat time to time, and I think that's what happened. I think LSU just dialed up a defensive back blitz that Tennessee wasn't ready for.
exactly. And Tennessee had a freshman running back in there on Dylan Sampson, who is probably not prepared. I mean, he gets a lot of credit for picking up the ball and saving them from a big loss. But yeah, he missed a block. I mean, freshman running backs miss blocks. That happens, So I'm with you. I think that it's something. I think it was just a play that LSU dialed up that worked out well. That I don't think Tennessee has to be that worried about.
No, I don't either. Garish saying, "Wow, LSU." I happen to know that Garish is a bit of an LSU fan, so I think he's a bit taken aback. Tennessee now 5-0, and Caleb, you predicted that at the beginning of the season. So before we get to your rapid reactions, let's just get your thoughts on Tennessee being 5-0, and as long as Alabama holds serve tonight, which I think they will against A&M, even if Bryce Young doesn't play, it will be, which you pointed out, the highest ranked matchup in the history of the Tennessee-Alabama series at 8-1, which comes out to an average of 4.5 ranking. And the highest before that was 9-1. There have been, I did the research about a dozen times where Tennessee and Alabama both been in the top 10. But this will be the most anticipated Tennessee-Alabama game in the history of the series. If you count ranking, that sounds bizarre, doesn't it? I stopped myself 3 times.
Well, it's insane because in everybody who's ever covered this series has talked about how it's uniquely a series of streaks.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't talk about is the reason it's a series of streaks is neither team is good at the same time. And I think the only exception to that was, I'm a little young. Dave, you might have been around during this time. I can't understand how Alabama beat Tennessee 7 straight from 86 to 92. I feel like Tennessee was better about 4 of those times and just let out. I mean, to me, that explains why Johnny Majors got fired. Johnny Majors had no excuse to lose 7 straight to Alabama from 86 to 92.
I agree. That's a little bit before my time in that I would be able to diagnose what happened. I do remember that it just seemed like he couldn't beat Alabama since 85 on. And I think there were times that Tennessee was the better team. I thought there were times in the Philip Fulmer era in the 90s that Alabama was a better team than they showed up as. I'm not going to say they were better than Tennessee, but there were a couple of blowout wins that I thought that Alabama was a better team than what they showed against the Vols. And let's face it, some of that becomes mental. But what I really like about this football team, before we get to your quick takes, rapid reactions, what I really like about this team is that I don't think they'll be affected by the history of the Alabama series. They weren't affected by the history of the Florida series. So I'm not saying they're going to beat Alabama, but I don't think they'll be affected by all the hoopla beforehand.
No, I agree. And we have to think about this with certain athletes of a certain generation. Who's committing to Tennessee today that is of the age of me or of the age of you that remembers caring about these games 10 years ago? They don't, And I think that's a big advantage they have. And so, I mean, things like this happen. You're right. I'm a big historian. In 1926, Robert Neyland was hired to beat Vanderbilt. I've done my I made my joke. I call it exhaustive Wikipedia searches now. That's my research, is exhaustive Wikipedia searches. And so Vanderbilt, there were years where they were just way better and Tennessee couldn't beat them psychologically. Neyland's hired in 1926. By the time he retires, Tennessee's even the series with Vanderbilt. Nobody thinks. I mean, as long as anybody paying attention to this podcast, any of us, none of us alive are going to live to see Vanderbilt even that series. But it wasn't that way in 1926.
No.
And
out of Benjamin said Caleb picking against Tennessee. Caleb didn't pick against Tennessee. Caleb picked Tennessee to win.
yeah, I picked Tennessee to go 5-0 to start the year.
I don't know exactly what that's about, but Benjamin, you may be a little confused there. We all picked Tennessee. We all picked, at least Amanda and I picked them at about the 9 or 10 range. How did you pick them going into this game score wise?
I picked Tennessee 42-35, which I took the over. And the mistake I made, and I'll freely admit it, is I didn't think Tennessee would hold LSU to 17 points. You know what I mean? So it's I mean, who did? Who saw that coming?
It's a little bit of both. Be sure and hit that like and subscribe button and also share so we can bring some more people into this. It's a little bit of both. That passing attack for LSU is not very good, despite the talent they have at receiver. They got a quarterback who's just not up and ready for this, and they don't have another option to go to. I thought Brian Kelly's comments at half were so incredibly transparent, and kudos to him, because these are the type of things that good coaches do. Good coaches put the good stuff on their players. Like when Josh Heupel said after the Florida game, "What about you guys? What about what you did beating Florida?" Whereas when things go bad, you put it on yourself if you're smart. That's what Brian Kelly did at half. Brian Kelly at half said, "We've got to coach better. We're getting out coached." No, they weren't. They were getting outplayed. I don't know they were getting out coached schematically in any shape, form, or fashion. They were just getting outplayed by a team that was more cohesive, by a team that is more talented, by a team that just played better. I didn't see an out coaching thing necessarily. I thought
No, I didn't either. The only thing I saw was a team that looked like it had a good bit of rest for 2 weeks. And I mean, that kind of stood out. But you're right. I think Brian Kelly stood up and took the blame. He knows his team's deficiencies a lot. It's a big gap from Jimbo Fisher a week ago when he's like, "Oh, we did everything right. We just didn't execute." Remember, Jimbo Fisher said that last week when they lost to Mississippi State. And I'm thinking, you're right. A good coach, and I got a lot of criticism for Phil Fulmer. I am not the biggest fan of Fulmer, but he always did stand up and take the blame when his team lost. And Brian Kelly did that today, and I give him credit for that. And I don't know how you feel about that. You covered him more than I did with Fulmer.
Yeah, I think that, well, that goes hand in hand. What did he also say behind closed doors that probably weren't as supportive? I think we had a discussion with Jonathan Crompton that was about that on Friday. But when we talk about this specific game, before we get to my report card, we want to make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. And be sure and share, because we want to bring more people into this conversation. And let's start with your takeaways before we get to my report card. So go to offthehooksports.com. And I know Daniel's saying, yeah, you want to maybe start the show a little bit sooner. I want to be really credible and make sure that the stories online that you can read right now, including the rapid reactions by Caleb and my report card, are there. So be sure and go there and check them out, even while you're watching the show. So like, subscribe, and share. Let's go to the rapid reactions that Caleb had, and we want to get to your comments. So the more people we can get on board, the better. So you got made fun of, by the way. I don't even know if you know this, but somebody said on one of those message board geniuses things that Tennessee shouldn't play you said Tennessee shouldn't play Cedric Tillman, and they kind of poked fun at you, which I thought was really a sign of their ignorance because I agreed with you. I didn't think that Tennessee had to play Cedric Tillman in this game. I thought it was too soon regardless. But you nailed it. They didn't need them because they had Jalen Hyatt and the receivers, one of your points, stepped up without Cedric Tillman. I thought that was huge.
Yeah, the thing that people miss about Cedric Tillman is I'm not trying to. That was not a knock on Tillman as a player
Oh,
at all, and I think he's going to be an NFL receiver. I have a lot of respect for him. In this game, LSU plays a lot of press coverage. Tennessee has a receiver who can beat that press coverage, and that's Brew McCoy because he weighs 220 pounds. You're not going to jam Brew McCoy at the line and get away with it. And they show, even though Jalen Hyatt got the touchdowns, Brew McCoy got the yards. I think he had 130 yards or something like that at the end of the game. But more importantly than that, because Brew McCoy is going to command that much attention because he's so good at breaking press coverage, that is where Jalen Hyatt's going to come in and be a huge deal. And he did. He showed up. I mean, he's a burner. And I've said this since the beginning of the year that if they owed it to the team to step up, it was Jalen Hyatt because he had a lot of hype last year. Didn't really live up to it, partially because Velus Jones Jr. was on the team. They took the offseason. He admitted he was not prepared the way he should have been. And quite honestly, I mean, can we talk about a player who has, Jalen Hyatt, he's done a lot of what he was supposed to do. And you can't really knock that. And he admitted that he wasn't ready for what he did, for what happened last year, that he didn't do what he should have been to get prepared. And it's really hard for somebody like me to criticize that because, I mean, he's really come back with a vengeance this
I
season.
think I think they have 3 guys that are gonna be drafted in the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft. I think they have Jalen Hyatt, I think they have Brew McCoy and Cedric Tillman. So one of the other rapid reactions you had, a special team spotted the early lead. They did, and Tennessee we wondered what impact D. Williams would have, and I think we all thought that it would be at the cornerback position, but boom, he returns a punt that he should have taken the distance. So your thoughts on Tennessee special teams?
Oh, I thought it was great. The only knock is obviously that Chase McGrath missed field goal, but I think, Dave, you probably agree with me on this. I'm harder on kickers than most people are. My rule with kicking is this. If you're in college, you should be automatic within 40. If you're in the NFL, you should be automatic within 50. Well, this was a 50-yard field goal, and he was a college kicker. So I'm not going to knock him for missing that 50-yard field goal and hitting the uprights. Outside of that one miss, can we really name a negative that happened on special teams?
Now, I tried to be fair in the report card that I want to go through. I couldn't. You had that. He made all of his other kicks. He did miss a 50-yarder, but it doinked. I mean, it hit the upright. Yeah,
And there's nothing embarrassing about that. It's not like he was a Missouri kicker missing a 25-yarder dead center to win the game.
no, I agree. So some other quick takeaways that you had, if you want to go to offthehooksports.com, is you said the pass defense still needs some work. I assume that that's a bit on a curve because Jaden Daniels, yes, I mean, everybody could still use some work, but why do you say the pass defense still needs some work?
They gave up a lot of third and longs, particularly in the first half. And I think that the linebackers are still, and I tweeted this. I don't know how you fix it. We've talked about this. I don't think you can fix it. They're just awful in coverage. And there was a lot of hype behind Aaron Beasley and Jeremy Banks, and they're just not that good in pass coverage. I think that showed up in this game. other factors bailed them out because, look, let's just call it what it is. Tennessee has a great rush defense. It's really underrated how good the rush defense is. I'm not saying it's, again, Dave, I'm not, you covered it. I'm not saying it's John Henderson and Albert Haynes within the middle, which I think is the greatest rush defense in the history of college football. I can't, I still can't believe that they had those two guys in the middle on the same team at defensive tackle. It's not that, but I do think that they have a pretty solid rush defense. And that stood out when, in the first half, Brian Kelly tried to play action on third down, thought he could catch Tennessee off guard. Josh Abel was ready for it. And then on fourth down, Tennessee sold out to stop the run, and they got him. But I do think there are some issues with pass defense and pass coverage. I think that the linebackers are still awful in pass coverage. And there were just so many factors.
I can't go awful anymore. I thought that Jeremy Banks played a ball in the second quarter really well. That was a little wheel route down the sideline. I mean, I've been with you on awful before. Average, slightly below average, I can roll with you. I can't go awful based off what I saw on Saturday. And I do know it's Jaden Daniels and things. If Bryce Young comes back, the Heisman Trophy winner next week, and we could be having the complete opposite conversation, I could be like, Caleb, you're right. Jaden Daniels is just that bad. But I can't go awful at this point. Awful? That seems a little strong.
You're right. Okay. It's hard for me to let go a year and a half of failures for a couple of plays in this game. And they still had their own issues in this game alone. Jaden Daniels, as we saw tonight, he's not Anthony Richardson. I think a lot of people thought he was going to be the same principle as Anthony Richardson. He's not. Even though if there was ever a piece of evidence you needed to know that touchdown to interception ratio is completely irrelevant, look at how Tennessee guarded Anthony Richardson versus Jaden Daniels. Who watched those two games and came away thinking Jaden Daniels was better, even though he had 6 touchdowns, 0 picks before this game? And I think they brought the pressure. Daniels couldn't handle it well. I don't want to be too hard on Daniels. I'm not trying to knock him too hard because he's in a new system. He's working with Brian Kelly, but
he's not ever going to be an above average SEC quarterback. I don't
know.
I mean, I think he's not going to be a top 5 SEC quarterback next year or the year after. I mean, he is what he is. They're trying to milk it out of him and what they can get out of him, but I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that you look at and even consider for all SEC candidacy before or after the season. Julian saying Tennessee still has to play Alabama and Georgia because the Vols are 2 years away from a legit contender from the SEC conference. Listen, I think they are a couple of years away from being a legit contender. I'm not going to argue that point, but I will argue this point that with this offense and what Tennessee has, there could be one of those days. And football is the ultimate sport where the best team usually wins. Would you agree with that, Caleb? I mean, you can get hot in basketball, sink a bunch of threes. That's why it's March Madness. In baseball, a pitcher can dominate. In hockey, a goalie can dominate and lead you all the way to a Stanley Cup. But in football, the better team usually wins. However, with this offense, could they upset an Alabama or a Georgia? I think it's possible. I'm not going to say likely, but I think it's possible.
I mean, based on how Georgia played, yeah. Alabama, they have a tendency to take things very personally. If anybody, I mean, what's the last time Alabama lost a game where you thought they had a chance to lose? They've lost some games over the past 10 years in Nick Saban's career, but never a game that people look at it like, oh, he might lose this game. Nick Saban and Alabama might lose this game. And, we're talking now. I think we all agree Alabama's going to beat Texas A&M tonight. I mean, we're all going to be shocked if they lose, particularly given what happened last
game. And yeah, I agree.
So assuming they win, they're going to be playing Tennessee next week. I'm just going to go ahead and call it out right now. College Game Day is going to be in town again next week.
Oh, yeah.
Who wouldn't be in town for that game? it's going to be the highest ranked game in Tennessee Alabama history. And I have a really hard time believing Alabama is going to take that lightly. Tennessee's best chance is Bryce Young being banged up. But outside of that, I mean, like, again, since the 2013 Auburn game, the kick six with Auburn, which that is, I my brother and I, funny enough, my brother's a big college football fan, bigger than me, funny enough. We have tracked lucky programs in football, and we have a debate over who's been luckier the last 20 years, Auburn or LSU. It's pretty close. I mean, they've had some massive lucky wins, those two. But we think Auburn kind of wins because of that kick six in 2013. The week before that, they had that tipped pass 4th and 30 whatever to beat Georgia. But since then, has Alabama lost a game where people really thought that, where they weren't blindsided? And they're not going to be blindsided in this game with Tennessee being undefeated.
Mr. Zip saying, let's get your stream going, baby. Yeah, I'm up for it. Go ahead and share, and let's get this thing rolling. Like I said earlier, I know we start a little bit later. We want to make sure the written product on offthehooksports.com is all squared away, and it is. So let's go through my report card. And if anybody wants to take any issue with, that's why I love doing the report cards, which actually you get, which is the most thankless getting ripped job in journalism, because you have to go see those coaches on Monday. But in this particular case, I don't think any coach would be upset with it. But I can tell you many a times people would say, C-, what's that all about? And really, it's a thankless job too, because Caleb and I were just talking about linebackers and defensive backs before we went on the air. Do we really know who is responsible for a busted coverage? No, but we kind of have to guess with the report cards to some extent. But I think I'm decent at it. Caleb, you tell me if not. And if anybody wants to disagree, feel free to jump on board. So I did have Hendon Hooker, a quarterback position, as an A-. He had the fumble that he rarely does. I don't think it's a sign of any issue. Still 0 interceptions, 17 of 27 for 239 yards. He ran the ball 10 times for 56 yards against LSU, throwing a touchdown pass in 17 consecutive games. So the only reason I didn't give him an A or an A+ was that fumble. He's got to hold on to the rock. You have any issue with an A-? Our listeners out there, or Caleb?
No, non-issue whatsoever. That fumble, and then there were a couple of missed throws right after that fumble, and I don't really blame him for that. I think he had some bruise. I think he got hit pretty hard, and it messed up his rhythm for a little bit.
I totally agree. Miss Jalen Hyatt, and then behind on the Princeton Fant throw. So, both of those, I'm sure he would like to have back. I think Jalen Hyatt was a pretty difficult throw. The Fant one is the one you get a feather in there. Vols time, so we need Texas A&M to get Bama a game. Somebody mentioned Georgia as well. Georgia and Auburn at the time that we're live, I don't know when you're watching this, it's 0-0 in the second quarter. Let me tell you what's going on at Georgia. I talked to a source pretty close to that situation. They've got a team that believes they can just turn it on, and that's a scary team. And I don't mean scary as in scares other teams. I mean, it probably scares Kirby Smart, because that is a football team that can slip up, especially against an offense like Tennessee, and lose a game because they think they can just turn it on. That's not the kind of football team you want, and that's not what Kirby Smart wants. So running backs, I had at an A. You had the one fumble by Jalen Wright, and other than that, you had Jabari Small just doing Jabari Small things, a 50-yard run, a 49-yard run. He tripped on one of those, or maybe he would have scored. Have any issues with an A in running backs? Again, I would have given a higher grade if not for the fumble that went out of bounds. That didn't hurt Tennessee.
No, not at all. I've been a big Jabari Small fan specifically since the start of the season, and I think he kind of lived up to that today. He had 127 yards on the ground. He also had a 3-yard catch, 2 touchdowns. I mean, I was making the case that he would break Travis Stevens' rushing record at the beginning of the year. I'm not going to get that right. That's a prediction I got wrong because he started off slow.
Wow. That was a big one that you threw. Oh, you have the extra. Wait, do you have the no? So you thought he was going to beat Travis Stevens?
I did. But Dave, you remember this. No one do you remember 2001? Everybody thought running back was going to be Tennessee's weakness that year.
Oh yeah, I
And
remember a reporter who works for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution now that took it personally that he said it was going to be a down year. Where I'm one that is willing to admit when I'm wrong. Yes, I thought it was going to be a slightly down year at running back, but he proved us wrong. And I remember that reporter saying, "Let's see what happens at Florida." Well, he ran for like 224 yards against Florida.
greatest well, I'm going to ask you, what's a better performance? Travis Stevens 01 Florida or Al Wilson 98 Florida? Who had a better individual performance against Florida?
Gosh, I would go Stevens.
You would
But
go Stevens?
yeah, I would. That's
But did Stevens benefit? Wasn't the interior offensive line like that year the best interior offensive line Tennessee's ever had with Scott Wells and
yeah, good.
Offenhuzel?
They were really good. Okay, you just changed my mind. I would go Al Wilson in that. The one you're not including in that is John Chavis with that Prowler defense. See, I think part of the reason that Steve Spurrier hung it up is because people started to figure him out. And if you remember, that Prowler defense would have one person with his hand on the ground. Do you remember bouncing around in 2001? You didn't know where the pressure was coming from. All Florida had to do is run the ball in 2001, and Steve Spurrier didn't want to win like that. He wanted to win his way. And Mr. Zip saying, Dave, tell all these fans that Tennessee is back. They keep saying we haven't been tested yet. You've been losing since 2005 and beat Florida once since then. This year, beat 3 ranked teams. Mr. Zip, let me ask you this while we go through this report card. What do you define as back? And Brittany says they agree with A- for Hooker. If back is that they can play with anybody in the nation and hang tight and perhaps win, yes, they're back. They're not 97, 98 back, where they arguably were the most talented team on the field that didn't have a gator on the side of their helmet in every game. They're not that back, Caleb. But as far as being able to hang with anybody, yeah, I think they can hang with anybody on their schedule, which is an upgrade what I thought in August.
I agree. If you but since 2007, they've been here before, or they've been back where they had a chance to hang with everybody on the schedule. I think 2016 was that way. They were just poorly coached with Butch Jones. I thought, honestly, I'm going to say this. This is going to be the hottest take you're going to hear all year.
Hot.
2012 Tennessee could have hung with anybody on the schedule had they hired the right defensive coordinator that year. That was the year where Tyler Bray was throwing to Cordarrelle Patterson and Justin Hunter. And I'm thinking that, if you just had a defense and some good coaching, you could have hung, but they didn't have any of that.
I wouldn't argue with that.
Yeah.
Who was the DC then?
Sal Sinceri. Derek Dooley here at Sal Sinceri. Yes.
Okay. Best review I ever got from another coach. Okay. You guys have to hear this because this will make me start giggling, which I tend to do. I asked this coach that had worked with Sal Sinceri. I said, because he had been a recruiter and he had been an outside linebacker coach. That was his MO. Great career. Nothing wrong with that. Save your money. You're going to retire a multimillionaire. But Tennessee decides to make him the defensive coordinator. So I asked a coach that had coached with him. And I said, what do you think of the hire? And he said, well, other than the fact that he's not very bright and he's not good with people, it's a great hire.
Not the best combination for coordinator. Oh, man.
It's not a good combination for a bus driver. You're not good with people and you're not very bright.
No, not at all. And to be fair, and this is why it's honestly why I know I understand you cover recruiting, so that's why you were very critical of Dooley. The only reason I gave Dooley a break, I know why he hired Sal Sinceri. Dave Hart was a new athletic director who was hired after Mike Hamilton, who did his own failures at Tennessee. Hart wanted his own head coach there. So he openly, blatantly sabotaged Dooley. And a bunch of guys left Tennessee. Justin Wilcox was most notable of them. the defensive coordinator at the time.
If they would have held on to Wilcox, Dooley would have been something, because I think Wilcox was a good defense coordinator.
I agree. I think that, and they couldn't, because Dave Hart came out and he basically said after that loss to Kentucky, you remember that infamous loss to Kentucky in 2011?
Yes.
And Dave Hart came out and basically said, he all but said, he didn't officially say it, but he basically implied, I'm not going to renew staff members' contracts because they're not doing their job. Well, of course they're all going to leave at that point. Like, if you're a defensive coordinator, why would you say?
Well, Dave Hart was hired as a hatchet man to get spending under control, which had gotten absurd. So, and part of that was combining the Lady Vol thing, which was just stupid. I don't mind that they combined the two athletic departments, but taking away Lady Vols was stupid. Receivers, tight ends, I had an A+. I can't remember if I mentioned those. Stop me if you disagree with any of these. Offensive line was an A. They ran for 262 yards on 49 carries. Again, I go back to that one bust with that. It was a hard hit on Hooker. I don't know who was at fault on that.
That's not on the line. That was on Dylan Sampson. Dylan Sampson missed a block easily, and he's a freshman. That's actually more on the coaching than even the running backs, because
I think you're right. So that's why I gave him an A, but I could have been talking at an A+. Defensive line, I gave an A+. Byron Young is going to be an SEC Defensive Player of the Week award candidate. He took advantage of an LSU offensive line that was playing without starting left tackle. I think Joshua Josephs, the two players that I think have the most special ability that you're going to be hearing about on Sundays, barring injury or them getting in trouble or something goofy, is going to be Joshua Josephs and Brew McCoy. Anybody, do you disagree with that at all, Caleb? Would you add somebody into that mix that's that special? To me, I have them talent-wise that much better, and then there's a drop-off.
No, I agree. I did not see this coming from Joshua Josephs. Honestly, if you held a gun to my head, I think you covered a little bit more preseason than I did this year. I thought James Pierce had more potential as an edge rusher than Joshua Josephs as a newcomer. I didn't see this. He's been knocking on the door for 3 weeks now, and this was. I mean, you're right. Joshua Josephs is a budding superstar for Tennessee, and I don't say that word lightly, but I'm looking at a potential superstar that is gonna, we're talking Derek Barnett maybe.
That sounds crazy. I think with his length and twitch, he might have more upside than Derek Barnett.
Wow. Okay.
I know I may be crazy.
Wait. Question. Here's the question. Because you were there. Is he Leonard Little or Sean Ellis?
No, neither.
He's neither?
I would have Sean Ellis. Okay, now we're assuming Leonard Little plays defensive end, right? Not middle linebacker.
Yeah, well, he moved there in '97. He moved to defensive end.
Right.
I think Sean Ellis was actually a better end than Leonard Little. Hot take.
I agree. No, I agree. He was better against the run too, and he had a great career in the NFL. Leonard Little should have never been a middle linebacker, but when he moved to defensive end, he was a great pass rusher, but he was kind of like Jadeveon. I would compare those two in some semblance to Jadeveon Clowney and Will Anderson. You could run at Jadeveon Clowney and negate him. You can't run at Will Anderson. That's why his tackles for losses are more significant than his sack numbers, because he is just a stud duck against the run, which Jadeveon Clowney was not, and I don't think Leonard Little was either. An early pick, Tennessee 32, Alabama 28. If the game's within 4 either way, then this program has taken a quantum leap over what we thought in August.
By the way, and everybody should pay attention to this. Forget Danny White hiring Josh Heupel. The best hire Tennessee as a university has made in the last 20 years is hiring Danny White. Has anybody looked at Danny White's track record of hiring coaches? Look at what Lance Leipold's doing at Kansas right now. I don't care what happened today with Kansas and TCU. I actually haven't looked. I haven't covered the game. I don't know who won that game. But
so he hired Leipold. You're going to have to help me a little bit, because you and I have been on and off this beat at different times.
Danny White was athletic director at Buffalo. He found Lance Leipold out of the blue when Buffalo was a disastrous program. Leopold was coaching Wisconsin Whitewater. Not Wisconsin, by the way, everybody. Wisconsin Whitewater. Not Wisconsin Milwaukee, where Bruce Pearl came from. Wisconsin Whitewater, okay? And I can say my wife's from Milwaukee, so I know all the random Wisconsin colleges. This is the most irrelevant college there is. Danny White found him, and he turned Buffalo into a winner. So much so that Kansas wanted him. And I think that just finding him alone, if that was by itself, athletic directors get lucky. Mike Hamilton got lucky. He found Bruce Pearl, and he made bad hire after bad hire after that.
Well, half lucky. He found a great schematic coach, and he found a good recruiter that maybe fibbed a little bit. So there was that. But I agree, he got lucky in finding him from purely a coaching standpoint. The integrity thing was maybe another issue. Linebackers and defensive backs, I gave them both a B plus. Again, stop me if any issue. Special teams, I gave an A. I go through my report card just like I did the Mondays after when you ran in the paper, and I second guessed myself. I should have probably given them an A plus on special teams. Coaching, I gave an A plus, and overall, I gave an A plus. I'm not one of those that thinks you have to average them all together at the end. We could nitpick times where Hooker wasn't as accurate, or we could nitpick times where the pass protection wasn't as great. But at the end of the day, to go down to LSU and a good team, not a great team, but to control that game and it never be in doubt, nobody thought that was going to be the case.
No, I didn't think it was going to be the case. As a matter of fact, I had on the other side I had a bunch of bold predictions. I said LSU would win the second half by 3 scores. Boy, was I wrong. I did not see Tennessee, because if anybody had followed LSU this year, they had been dominant in the second half. And I said Tennessee needed to build a huge first half lead. They kept their foot on the gas in the second half, and they haven't done that all year, by the way.
There was a moment, and Elias, great point. I think I mentioned earlier, LSU had 17 yards from their backs. I may have not mentioned, but I saw it. So thanks for bringing that up. Any stats you guys see and you want to bring to the house, go ahead and do that. And the one factor last week, Caleb, and this comes from covering a beat day in and day out, that I thought Tennessee might win decisively was when I heard of the players only meeting. I'm telling you, that is the biggest red flag in the world, because when you have a players only meeting, you go in with one issue and you walk out of that room with about 18 issues, because everybody runs their mouth and everybody goes, and LSU had that players only meeting. You know whose teams were just absolutely had a players only meeting and a wake up call every week? Jerry Green's basketball teams.
Oh, I forgot about those teams.
Who underachieved as much as anybody. And by the way, Ron Slay is confirmed. He's going to be a weekly guest on our show that starts at 8:30 each and every.
Ron Slay is one of my favorite people to ever play sports at Tennessee. So
he's one of my favorite people in the world. And he is just phenomenal. And he's going to make time for us each and every week, not starting this upcoming week, but the following week. So that and Jonathan Crompton, and we've got Jacob Warren and Cooper Mays. Those will be on our YouTube page on Sunday. So be sure and hit like and subscribe and leave your comments below. But in the end, I don't think Tennessee could have asked for much more. I say this with the backdrop that I don't think Jaden Daniels is in the top 2/3 of the quarterbacks. I think he's in the bottom third of the quarterbacks in the SEC. I say this with a program at LSU that is in disarray, even if they don't know it. And I say all of that. Tennessee went down and took care of business. And this is a Tennessee team. This is a Tennessee team. Had they had that fumble that LSU had on the opening kickoff under other coaches, would have folded just like LSU did. I don't think they do that. If they fumble the opening kickoff against Alabama, I don't think that means they fold. LSU folded today.
I agree, and I want to point this out right now ahead of time. because the last time Tennessee was 5-0 was 2016, and then do you remember how that ended, Dave? The last year of 2016, where Butch Jones's team unraveled and he made his champions of life comment, and we want recruits with 5-star hearts, and like
Champions.
this team is different, and it's not because we're covering the team. This is not homerism or anything like that. That 2016 team was super experienced, had way higher expectations. This team is playing with, and that team underachieved by every measure. This team, there's nothing that could happen with it. Josh Heupel's way ahead of where other coaches were in their second year at Tennessee, and I don't think we can underestimate that, which is that the 2016 team was 5-0, but should have been 5-0. And honestly, it was embarrassing that they had to work so hard to get to 5-0, because remember the Hail Mary against Georgia that year?
Yeah.
And this team is not that. We have to be honest. I've watched some of your interviews with John Adams, and he's like, guys, understand Tennessee has some limitations here. And you have to give Josh Heupel credit for getting them to 5-0 right now.
Yeah. And I mean, they are not they're middle of the pack talent-wise, and people get mad at Chris Landry for that. I think you should have the exact opposite reaction. By the way, if you haven't heard his breakdown of Nico Iamaleava on the YouTube channel, you got to hear that. Nico's better than he was when he committed to Tennessee. He's significantly better. And also great breakdowns of Jordan Matthews, plug, and Ethan Davis. But Caleb, in the end, what do you think the spread will be? You know that Tennessee is going to be probably, I think the line moves towards Alabama like we saw it. I don't know. Let me just ask you, what do you think the spread will be? Because assuming Alabama wins by 14, 20 points tonight against A&M, which I think we all think they will.
So Tennessee and Alabama, since Nick Saban has been there, Tennessee has been ranked or flirting with the top 25, if you want to say, 3 times with Alabama: 2007, 2015, 2016. 2015, they were 3-3. I'm not counting that. That was kind of, there were some things that went on that year. 2016 and 2007, Alabama just beat the brakes off them both times. And so if I'm setting the line, I'm setting Alabama by 2 touchdowns. And I wouldn't, at least.
I was going to be about 10.5.
I could say 10.5, but it depends on how healthy Bryce Young is, which we're going to see tonight, by the way, too. And
I'm factoring that in because not a great source, but a good source. I'll tell you when they're great. I'll tell you when they're good. But a good source from Alabama said that he's probably out a couple of weeks.
Wow. Okay, that's intriguing. By the way,
now that being said, this is not a great source, so he could end up playing tonight, and I look like a village idiot.
By the way, anybody who follows gambling rightly, like the way I do, Dave, I'm going to give a hot take, totally side note here, because we're talking about this. People who think Pete Rose, what he did wasn't unforgivable, if you think that it's okay that he was just betting on his team to win, no, you're still skewing the odds makers and the bookmakers that set the line for the games. That's why he should be banned for baseball from life. I have never forgiven Pete Rose.
And I love you, Caleb, but we're going to say Pete Rose for when we really need it in June. Okay.
Sorry, I just had to say that because there's this new movement of getting Pete Rose back into baseball. And I'm like,
not. He's a dirty, dirty gambler.
You should never, and I said this about Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley should be banned from football. You should never be allowed to bet on the sports you play. I'm a bettor, and it creates a massive conflict of interest because you just talked about a source you had. The bettors have the ultimate sources. And I don't care if you're betting on your team every night. You're creating people need to understand you are skewing things in a massive direction when you bet on the sports you play.
True. How stupid would I be if I went ahead and laid a bet before the end of the night on Hendon Hooker to win the Heisman? Would that be stupid? He's a 16-1. $100 would definitely pay for my trip to go to the Heisman ceremony. I've already.
Yeah. So
I love Mr. Zip. He's
I
saying,
say take the bet.
hit that button right now. Get GBO. I love Mr. Zip.
I say take the bet, and the reason I say take the bet is following bets. And by the way, I'm just want to say I may or may not have followed odds on presidential elections in the past, and I may have made some money on those. But okay, that's illegal. But so
Don't say that, Ben.
I might not have been in the country when it happened. Okay,
That's fair. Caleb has a home in the Cayman Islands. In the end, is Tennessee.
But I was just going to say, Hendon Hooker, you get great odds because you're not going to get a better payout than you will betting on anybody else than you would with Hendon Hooker.
No, see, essentially, and I hate to say this but essentially, you would be betting on CJ Stroud to get hurt.
I mean, no, that's true. That's true. But I mean, that's possible
because I think he can overcome Caleb Williams with the East Coast bias, and I think that
East Coast bias is dead. There's nobody on the East Coast East Coast football is dead.
Well, I mean, from the Mississippi River over, I do think there's a bias for the SEC. I think if I think there are a lot of the 2/3 of the voters are east of the Mississippi. So I think if there was a voter and he looked at the stats of Caleb Williams, he looked at the stats of Hendon Hooker, and one did it in the SEC and one did it at USC under Lincoln Riley, that's done it many, many times, I think they would go in the direction of Hendon Hooker.
I can see that. And how wild is that? Because about 20 years ago, LA would have had the media favorability over Tennessee. But I'm with you. I think that funny enough, I think that one of the funny things that people think nowadays is that there's this SEC bias from the media. I distinctly remember a day where that wasn't a thing, and I think the SEC kind of earned the bias that they get from the media. So
yeah, they do get a bias, and they deserve it. And there was a Big Ten bias. It wasn't that long ago that you would have thought the Michigan-Ohio State game was the Super Bowl, and ESPN promoted that out the wazoo, and I thought that the SEC was significantly better. So listen, if there's a bias, they've earned it.
They've absolutely earned it. And people have this mentality that exists. The only team from a BCS conference to finish the season undefeated without a national title was an SEC team, Auburn, in 2004. So if anybody wants to say that there's an SEC bias, that's the only stat I have to give them. Because, and by the way, the team that won it that year ended up having to give up their title for cheating. I don't think they should have to give up their title because I'm like, the scandal with Reggie Bush is not a real scandal. Oh my gosh, they paid for his family to be in hotel rooms.
Well, it was like a $1.5 million house. But the weird thing to me is I took my son to tour Southern Cal, and because he's a film buff, and they don't have O.J. Simpson's, or they don't have Reggie Bush's Heisman Trophy up, but they have O.J. Simpson's.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, in the Orange Bowl in 2005, talk about a fail of celebrities. O.J. Simpson was there. So O.J. Simpson, when USC beat Oklahoma, remember that blowout game with Jason White? Pete Carroll had O.J. Simpson go speak to the team. And that's a funny one. And then they had Ashley Simpson perform that year. And that was the one where, look, she's not good, but I felt so bad for Ashley Simpson with the boos that happened. That was just embarrassing, the way she got booed at the Orange Bowl that year.
Hey, Daniel, what you just said right there on the message boards means a lot to all the visitors. Dave has some of the best original content involved football. Great unbiased opinions, great interviews, and he doesn't make you feel like you're the only fans of YouTube. Oh, he's only fans that adult site.
No, they actually said a couple years ago they tried the idea that they were going to ban like explicit content, and then they realized, oh wait, that's where all our money comes from. So
somebody told me on YouTube that you're doing pretty well when you have adult websites that constantly post on your message boards, and I can tell you that I clean about half a dozen of those off a day.
So, by the way, speaking of, because we're talking about the game,
it's not you, is it?
I'm going to hell for this, but Dave, I have to say it. Hooker was never touched by BJ tonight.
So good. Now that is a good point, though. BJ, pronounce his last name for me so I don't look stupid.
Ojulari, I think that's how I pronounce it.
Yeah, Ojulari is correct. He didn't do anything.
I mean, he had 6 tackles, but only 2 were solo, and I mean, he wasn't really like that effective in a real way.
Man, I think there's some quit on that team. I don't think they like Brian Kelly. I think they like living the fun life off the field, knowing that an NFL future was out there under Ed Orgeron, and I don't think they like the discipline of Brian
I
Kelly.
mean, if you had Ed Orgeron as a head coach who lived the fun life,
Oh,
I
mean, are you? I still remember my favorite Ed Orgeron quote. I remember my Ed Orgeron quote that was so funny is when he spoke.
Are you going to quote Farmer Fan from Waterboy?
No, he spoke. I can do a great Ed Orgeron impression, and I texted him and called him 3 times this week, and he wouldn't come on. I don't know if there's still something with his buyout where he can't talk about LSU. Probably so.
I can't talk about LSU. What is it, guys?
No, it's always the same. What's up, Luke? And but the best quote. Okay, so if you've ever been to the Knoxville Quarterback Club, and I'm going to leave you with this: if you've ever been to the Knoxville Quarterback Club, it's a bunch of dudes older than me that have a lot more money than me, and they are as conservative as you can imagine. Okay, so he he's speaking to the quarterback club, and he said, you know, everybody wants to talk about Warren Sapp getting 3 sacks on Saturday. Nobody wants to talk about getting the M16 out of his dorm room on Monday.
What?
M16, the semi-automatic weapon out of his dorm room on Monday. And he was not kidding.
Oh my gosh.
Like, subscribe, and share. Like, subscribe, and share. I thought that was a good Ed Orgeron impression. Wow, man. Again, on our YouTube channel, I can't tell if some people are making fun of me or not, but on our YouTube channel, tomorrow it'll be Jacob Warren, it'll be Cooper Mays. And for those of you that got mad at Chris Landry, he is absolutely just telling you what he thinks and his honest opinion, and you're going to love what he has to say about Nico. So go check that out because he thinks he's better. And he talked to a lot of people on behalf of offthehooksports.com about the leadership abilities, which I know you've heard before. But again, Chris Landry of LandryFootball.com, he's going to give you the honest truth. So is Caleb Calhoun. That's why I love working with these guys. Mr. Zips and Dave. Okay. Okay. I love Mr. Zip. Mr. Zip. I actually would love to stay here and work with Dave. Well, okay. We'll see how that works. I'll just send you this, Dave.
By the way,
yes,
I think we were all ahead of the curve with Orgeron. The Blind Side, I think many Tennessee fans knew that was a fraud. That movie was a fraud because they did, and I'm from Memphis, so I can say this. They did just try to funnel him to Ole Miss. Michael Orr.
Oh, no question. The one time I talked to Michael Orr, I drove to Memphis and covered a bunch of kids, and Orr, it's before everybody had a cell phone. Or had it on all the time. And I couldn't get in touch with Michael Orr. So I'm driving back and he finally calls me back and I'm on my cell phone. I'm driving through Nashville, going back to Knoxville. And he loved Philip Fulmer. I've never heard a prospect in my life speak so glowingly about a coach that he didn't end up committing to. There is no question. Was it Taco Bell or what was it that the guy had? That
Sean Tui, and he was the Grizzlies color commentator too because he covered the Grizzlies NBA and he owned 87 Taco Bells.
Okay. There is no question that Taco Bell, no question in my mind, sent Michael Orr to OleSs. There's zero question. And if I was Philip Fulmer, I always was surprised that he was in that movie. I'd been like that. To heck with you all. I almost said something else. I try not to curse. I've cursed once.
Particularly when Philip Fulmer has proven himself to be pretty good about getting teams in trouble for shadily recruiting Memphis recruits. Albert Means anybody?
Oh, I could send you a document that you would laugh out loud having to do with a Memphis booster who I'm sure you know his name.
Logan Young?
Yes, rest his soul. And it was very not PC. And Philip didn't realize that when it goes to the SEC from a university, that's public record, and read through that and
Of course, he wouldn't know that, by the way.
question whether or not that's, I'm not going to confirm nor deny that that was the booster, that maybe favors were involved to get a car, not the kind of favors that typically take place between boosters and players. So almost say, this went way off the rails. Have a fantastic evening. Enjoy
It
the
went off the rails because this is Tennessee being back. Okay, the drama of SEC football and recruiting is only better when Tennessee's relevant, and so
It is. And this is something that's going to be on offthehooksports.com within a couple of days. This will hands down get what Tennessee has done, this 5-0, and the way they've done it. There will be one 4-star that ends up at Tennessee that wouldn't have otherwise. I don't know who it is. It could be, who's the kid who I think will end up at Clemson that was, oh my gosh, he was committed to Penn State. His name suddenly is escaping me. The defensive end. I'm sure somebody on there knows. But it might be him. I don't know. I hear Clemson. But look at Jordan Matthews now, too. I mean, Jordan Matthews is a guy that LSU loves and Texas is making a run at. But I'm sure he was there for the game after what he saw. Is he going to go to Texas? I mean, he's a Tennessee commit. I think you just reinforce. I mean, his reinforcement may be the recruiting impact of today. I don't put a lot in one games, but this is kind of the one game that's a little bit different for me. Byron Young and JJ on defense, Hooker or Brew on offense. I think he's talking about the two top players. I will say this. I believe Joshua Josephs, I'll end with this. Joshua Josephs and Brew McCoy are the two most talented players on this team. I believe they're the guys you'll talk about that go, barring something crazy happening, going in the first round. Cedric Tillman, we had a question, will he be back? You don't force him back because you have UT Martin the week after that. So then he could be 100% healthy, and you respect the young man. The last thing you would want to do, Caleb, and again, for those just tuning in, Caleb got made fun of on Message Board Bingo, but he was right. Not Message Board Bingo, the Message Board Geniuses. We didn't refer to it on the show. Caleb was right saying you don't need to play Cedric Tillman. And Caleb was absolutely 100% right. And I thought the same thing. And I actually responded to those idiots and told them that you haven't watched this team. You don't know anything about them if you think you should force Cedric Tillman out there against LSU. So Brew McCoy will be a higher draft pick than Cedric Tillman. And he's already,
I agree.
He's projected 21.
I agree. I think Cedric Tillman is he's the Jawan Jennings to Brew McCoy's, I don't know the receiver you name, but I still am a bigger fan of Cedric Tillman as a player because you can't quantify the intangibles, and I think Cedric Tillman has the intangibles. But in a game like this, Brew McCoy is a more talented player, if that makes sense. If I could go back to it, I'm just going to say it because we talked about it last week. If we go to defensive tackle in 2001, Albert Haynesworth was a better player than John Henderson. I think John Henderson just had the intangibles more than anything else.
That's actually that's a very, very good comparison. Now, I don't think Brew McCoy has the anger issues that Albert had.
No, I'm not trying to compare Brew McCoy to Albert Haynesworth in terms of character.
Yeah, he didn't dump a bucket of mop water on a homeless man.
Didn't Albert Haynesworth go and take a 10-foot leave practice one day and take a 10-foot pole and bring it back? And he was,
oh yeah, that was my favorite practice moment ever.
Oh, you covered that. Okay.
I was standing right there as he walked by with a big pole, and he was going to take it upside Will Offenhusel's head.
Will Offen, who was a great offensive lineman, by the way.
Yeah, who I took out to dinner after his career because we couldn't do NIL things back then. And I remember him wrapping his hand, and Jacob Warren's a big guy, but I remember him wrapping his hand around the beer mug, and it looked like a shot glass. And each one was just one down. There was no sipping. Here I'm sipping my beer, and I'd worked all day. And he goes, and we ate a ton of food at this Mexican restaurant. And he said, now we got a full belly. We can really go out and party. And I was like, well, I can't hang with you, man. I got to go.
Man, those days, though, weren't they awesome when you knew that if you just ate enough, you could just drink like that and party?
I never could. I had to do one or the other. when I ate a lot, I was like done. I want to go home and go to bed, or I wouldn't eat, and then I'd get out of control. That's why I don't drink anymore. Andre the Giant moment, exactly. Elias, I want to see you back on here because you've had some good comments. All right, let me run through real quick. Any other questions? The Tillman thing, I would not force him into action. I don't think there's
Not at all.
no. But if he says he wants to go, that's fine. But I don't think you undermine. I think Josh Heupel has a really good thing going, and that his players trust and believe in him. You wouldn't force him out there. Butch Jones would force him out there.
I agree. By the way, speaking of Tillman, though, win one for the Tiller, like we talked about earlier this week.
Yes.
Keyshawn Booty, 33 yards receiving. He did have a touchdown, most meaningless touchdown in the history of touchdowns in the SEC.
Yep.
And, they did a good job on him. And so I think even after this game, he still has fewer yards receiving than Cedric Tillman, and Tillman hasn't played 3 games this year. So
this is a lot of fun, guys. We will I'll put my email in there, Mr. Zip. I'll put it in there again. There you go. Feel free to reach out. And yeah, we're growing something that's pretty neat here. We miss Amanda LaFrada. She'll be back next week. She'll be on Monday, of course. And Monday, we will have a great lineup for you, and we'll break down the weekends. Absolutely. We appreciate you. Don't forget Jacob Warren, Cooper Mays tomorrow for Caleb Calhoun, and it's all on offthehooksports.com. His rapid reactions, my report card, and more coming. This has been a presentation of Off